Ashton-Cirillo. Hi, folks. Welcome to Resolute Square. We are supposed to have two guests with us tonight, Malcolm Nance and Sarah Ashton-Cirillo. Unfortunately, Sarah, who is serving in a frontline unit in Ukraine, was called forward. We're trying to get Malcolm on the line now. We're having a little technical difficulties on his side. So until then, Stuart and I are going to join you for another conversation about Ukraine and the importance of the president's visit there this week, and about where we're going in the world with Russia returning to its status as one of the great great gravity wells of evil. Stuart, thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, brother. Listen, I think this is a real celebration of two Americans who, left very comfortable lives and went to Ukraine to fight.
For
And
sure.
it's extraordinary to me to do this. It's in the tradition of those that volunteered to fly for the RAF before we had entered the war.
That's right.
Or went to Spain to fight for the Lincoln Brigade.
Or in World War I, the Lafayette Escadrille of American.
That's right, the Lafayette Escadrille. And I think it's very reassuring that there's still Americans out there that will do this. We have a little clip from Sarah that she shot literally from the trenches. If we could roll that.
And folks, this is seen nowhere else. This is a contributor to Resolute Square, a friend of ours, and somebody who is displaying some extraordinary bravery every single minute of the day.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Ashton-Cirillo. I have been in Ukraine for more than 11 and a half months, having arrived just a week after the full-scale invasion to cover the situation as a war correspondent. During that time, I lived for more than 8 months in the embattled and resilient city of Kharkiv, where I got to know Malcolm Nance, and Malcolm has truly been one of my personal heroes during this entire war and this entire attempt to regain Ukraine's liberty. So while I was working as a reporter, I covered a lot of death, and I covered a lot of destruction, and I covered a lot of Russian terrorism and war crimes. And simply put, it led me on a path to becoming a soldier. As you see, I'm geared up, ready to head out to the front as soon as my commander calls for us to go.
We live in a remarkable world, Stuart, where an American citizen who had gone as a reporter feels and sees the outrageous brutality, the war crimes being executed by Vladimir Putin, and instead of, like many Americans in the MAGA movement, either making excuses for Putin or siding openly with him, she goes to the front lines and says, send me. I'm going to go as a medic, the hardest, most dangerous job in many ways in any combat situation.
Yeah, very high rate of injury and deaths. You've read, so where Pete Reed, the American hero who had been a Marine and medic and volunteered in Iraq, Syria, and was killed and seems to have been targeted deliberately by the Russians. And I hope whoever fired that missile will be held accountable. I think that's one of the great tests we're going to have after this war, after Ukraine wins, and that is the West's ability to hold these Russian war crimes, war criminals accountable.
Mm-hmm.
I think we didn't do enough of that in World War II, but that's a different show.
Agreed.
There were a lot of reasons that, in part because we were worried about the Soviet Union, that we didn't. But I hope that there is an international will and a mechanism, and it doesn't have to wait like, what happened in the Bosnian War, where there was only a few people that went on trial and it took forever.
Right. I think, Stuart, I think that's exactly right. Like, the accountability function of an international order is vital. And unless we have a degree of, okay, we know this general and this intelligence service person and this, we've got a pretty clear chain of how to go, a chain of responsibility with these people. And if it's folks like the Wagner Group, we have a chain of responsibility that leads up right to Putin's, very closest allies. And, it's one thing to get them to The Hague, That may be hard in some cases, but the degree to which the international order can do a lot of things to make their lives absolutely untenable is striking. And there are still a lot of these people who have not yet had their assets seized. I mean, I would like to go to everyone around Yevgeny Perozin and make sure that every second, third, fourth cousin, everybody he ever met, everybody he was ever on a bus with, that they're sanctioned as well. And the pressure.
Perozin, he's under indictment in the United States for
Yep.
attacking our elections.
Yep.
I'd love to see that guy stand trial in the United States.
I mean, look, I'll settle for him being in the way of a cruise missile at some point, but
yeah.
But the justice function of an international order of a community of nations that wants to try to prevent this kind of thing in the future, you have to hold the people that caused it accountable. And so, from the top, Vladimir Putin has to be held accountable. Now, Putin's an old man now. He's getting at that age where dictators either are deposed or killed outright, because the dictator retirement program, as you've noted before, is not a really good one.
Yeah,
it's never really a good clean end.
We should talk for a minute about Malcolm Nance. Hopefully, he's going to be able to join us. But for the last 3 decades, Malcolm Nance has made our lives a lot safer in ways that none of us will ever know. He's worked in the national security community in different covert operations. He is another person who volunteered, left his comfortable life, went to Ukraine to fight, retired from the Navy, in the intelligence service. And he is an extraordinarily prolific author.
He really is.
Guy,
I mean, the guy just
a tremendous author. If we could, I don't know if we can put up some of his books, but his last one, They Want to Kill Americans, which is a deep dive into the dark world of American militias and the shock troops that
because it's so real. We saw it on January 6th, just how real it was.
He has this ability to write things that turns out to be prophetic. He wrote a book about hacking the election. They want the plot to hack America, I think is the title. It really, you want to know the plot to betray America, which is the plot to destroy democracy. These are tremendous books. They're very, very interesting and informative. And he comes at it from an intelligence officer's angle.
Yes.
Which I find fascinating.
For sure.
The way that he connects these dots and takes a lot of information that's sort of in the public purview, says, okay, this is what this really means. Yeah. So if you haven't read Malcolm Nance,
definitely recommend it, for sure.
You definitely.
I was talking to another reporter today who is in Ukraine, from a Ukrainian outlet, and I mentioned Americans being over there, and he told me, he said, it is a tremendous morale boost for our people. He said the legion, basically, of American folks who have come over, many of them are highly qualified, like Malcolm. Yeah. Many of them are special operator types. Many of them have been around a long time. He told me today that a number of them that are now starting to come in are folks who can help when the American tanks arrive, maintain and train on those, so that the Ukrainian people are able, and the Ukrainian armed forces are able to push back against the Russians in the immediate future. I think Sam in our production office has another video from Sarah about the morale of the troops over in Ukraine.
That would be fantastic.
Having seen this war firsthand for almost a year, one thing that's been amazing to me to witness, both as a soldier, but also when I was a civilian, was the morale of my now fellow soldiers in staying strong in the face of adversity, staying strong in the face of incredibly long odds, as we have now gained the upper hand against the Russian invaders. And so troop morale, especially when compared to the reports we're receiving from the Russian side, is extraordinary. This is one of the driving forces. Every single person that is fighting for Ukraine's liberty, whether you're wearing a uniform or the civilians, the volunteers, and the international volunteers who are outside of the borders of this country have come together in a way that has been not only resounding, but has actually gone up in a sense when it comes to the spirit, effort, and energy to make certain we achieve total victory and inflict a transformative defeat upon the Russian enemy.
I mean, wow.
I mean, as clear as could be.
I mean, let's just pause for a minute to think about, Biden's visit. Um, it must have done, extraordinary things for if you're out there in a trench, and there's got to be moments when you're out there. I mean, I'm just it's unimaginable to me where you just wonder if anybody really cares what you're doing. Day after day after day, you see friends wounded and killed, and then to wake up and see an American president, in a war zone. It's such an extraordinarily brave thing that Biden did.
Yep.
And someone who, you talk about this, who really has risen to the moment.
It really is. I mean, I've been reflecting on the speech, not only in Kyiv, but the speech in Poland. And I think both of those speeches on this trip, they reflect a really important part of the American political tradition for every single president since Roosevelt, except for Donald Trump, where every single American president, we didn't have to agree with everything they did or every single policy that happened, but from Truman to Ike to Kennedy to Johnson to Nixon to Ford to Carter to Reagan to Bush 41 to Bill Clinton to W to Obama to Joe Biden. It's an interesting people who stood up against either the Soviet Union or the misbehavior of the post-Soviet Russia. One person in that long list went out of his way to excuse and accommodate and get in bed with those people. And I think it is just so striking. It's such a contrast. And rhetorically, and Stu, you've written any number of presidential speeches. Historically, the Biden speeches, they're going to stand up. Maybe they aren't as much drama as tear down this wall at that one moment, but man, they're good. And they're so solid. They're such legacy items. I think it's just tremendously impressive the kind of effect this visit is going to have.
It's fascinating to think about the power of words in this war. I mean, when you look at Zelensky and how he has been able to galvanize an entire civilized world by his deeds, by not leaving, but by his words. I mean, words can be weapons. And there's something about 100%. This, I mean, you and I both right. It's something about this that I find incredibly encouraging, that we're still in a world where words matter. They're not up there holding up emojis,
right. And rhetoric and leadership.
Rhetoric, and it's a thought process.
And it really is, Stu. I mean, I was really contemplating it all. And again, we talked about this last night on Strategy Session. Reading Putin's speech, it was defensive, it was pecked, it was tiny, it was constrained. It wasn't about big human ideas. It was this almost pro forma, unpleasant sort of grind. This is a man who lives in a horrible, dark space, and being confronted by a confident American leader, leading a confident NATO, leading confident subgroups under NATO, with the Baltic states, and seeing that, if you're Putin, if you're the Russians, and you're on the other side of this equation, you're thinking to yourself, we say NATO's fighting us, but we know they're not yet. And God forgive us if they ever do.
You and I worked for the Republican Party for a long time. And I mean, I think that it was unimaginable to us that a Republican president would be elected who is unequivocally backed by Russia. And knowing 100%. Everything knowing everything we do, 95+% of the party, all the officials, elected officials, still say that they would support that person if he was a Republican nominee. How do you call yourself an American if you say that you will support someone who, if not is a de facto Russian agent, if not officially a Russian agent?
Right.
What does that mean? And if the essence of the Soviet Union propaganda has been to destroy faith in democracy, because
from the start,
that America really wasn't a democracy. And they would point out real flaws that we've had. I mean, this is an area, if you go back to the 20s and 30s, which drew a lot of Americans over there, speaking to racial inequities. But for a majority of a party to adopt this, to say that we don't really live in a democracy, that the president of the United States is not really legally elected,
right?
It is just carrying on Putin's propaganda.
And look, and there's a certain mercenary nature to the American media climate at Fox and elsewhere, where the things in Putin's speech, they're literally on Tucker Carlson last night and tonight. They are literally the word for word defenses of Russia and attacks on America from what is essentially an American fifth column. And again, there's a certain venal mercenary nature to it. I get that, but it is also like there's for folks who pretend that they are the ultimate patriots, for folks who pretend that they are more patriotic, more pure, more American than anyone else, especially anyone who's either politically different or racially different. They really have something to answer for in this country, and I mean, I think holding them to account is even less likely in some ways than holding serious Russian oligarchs to account, but they should be. And if they had any moral sense or any sense of honor, they would feel obligated to change their ways. But obviously, Fox and honor are not words that go together.
Yeah, I mean, it's so striking how ultimately it's working against their own best interest. Because you try saying this shit in Russia. I mean, you can't hold up a blank.
You're thrown out a window.
Paper. Yeah.
You're thrown out a window.
And so the system that they're criticizing, that they feel is too liberal, it's like when we see these corporations given to candidates that supported the insurrection. Why do you do that? You want to be a CEO in Russia? Really?
Right.
I mean,
no one wants that.
Yeah, I mean, don't you realize how good it is? And you know what? I wish we should do a special show just about Putin's speech, because it is incredibly telling. There are sections there where he attacked the decadence of the West, which is primarily, it could have come from Ron DeSantis.
Sure.
An attack on anyone who's not white.
I mean, Putin and Ron DeSantis have almost exactly parallel policies about LGBT.
Yeah.
They both want to marginalize them and push them out of society.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, Putin might be a little more aggressive than that, but the similarities between MAGA and Putinism and whatever kleptocratic post-Soviet system you want to call it are striking. They are transactional. They're dedicated to power alone. It really is remarkable. Speaking of power, we talked a little bit earlier about the Wagner Group, which is this mercenary Russian army fighting in Ukraine. Sam, let's roll that clip about the Russian troops and Wagner.
I've been serving in the armed forces of Ukraine since the middle of October. However, I've only been at the zero line and the frontline position since the first days of February. And what's been interesting to me during that time period, as we've come face to face with the Russians, 5 times thus far, they have pushed at our position, and 5 times we have stopped them and repelled their advances. They do continue to come and come. But one thing that we've noticed against the actual Russian military, not the private military contractors from the Wagner Group, is that they are better equipped and better soldiers than they were at the beginning of the war. We are fighting a real army, but we're also beating a real army. They show no signs of stopping. But the good news is we will never lose to them, no matter how well equipped they are, because we have more spirit, we have more capacity, we have better leaders, And ultimately, we have the people of Ukraine and the free world behind us. And that is why we've been winning and we will achieve total victory.
You know, Sarah Cirillo she is fighting right now in a country half a world away in conditions that are unbelievably dangerous against an unbelievably large force that is willing to do anything and everything. And every time we talk to her or get one of her articles or watch something like that, it reminds me that courage is the highest virtue in many ways. I mean, you and I have never been in that situation, and it's unimaginable for most Americans to think about being so moved by the reality of this invasion that they would go willing put their lives on the line, not just once or twice. You know, look, the president was willing to get on a 10-hour train, go to Kyiv. There was a risk the Russians would act up. There was a risk the Russians would cross the line and try to show off. And he took that risk. But people like Sarah and Malcolm are taking that risk every single day they walk out there. And hundreds and almost, I think it's thousands of Americans that are over there are taking that risk also. And by the way, folks, it's not just people on the front lines. There are civil engineers. There are people trying to rebuild the Ukrainian electrical grid. There are people trying to harden buildings. There are people trying to rebuild schools, which are a favorite target. Apartment buildings, they're another favorite target of Putin. And you know, it speaks well of the world that a lot of folks from NATO and from America have gone there. And I mean, I can't salute them more highly. I really can't.
You know, Sarah has urged a lot of people, has urged everyone to support this organization, Liberty Ukraine.
Yep.
Which donates for medical services. She's spoken about the tangible benefits that they've gotten. They've gotten equipment, they've gotten trauma kits, they've gotten generators that they didn't have before. So everybody watching, if you haven't donated to Liberty Ukraine, if you have, do it again. Consider it. It's a way to directly help these people and help win this war.
Yeah, Liberty Ukraine is a great organization, and there's a real need for the kind of support that it isn't military aid directly, but it provides a lot of the infrastructure folks need. I know another person who's there as a civil engineer who's, as he put it, combat adjacent, and they need things like batteries. It's crazy what you consume in an environment like that when the infrastructure's been beat up. And so that's the kind of work that can help so many people. And it's the kind of organization that can help so many folks. And again, one thing we encourage folks to do is make sure, especially if you're in a Republican congressional district, that you call your member of Congress, you tell them directly, I believe that Ukraine must have American support. Because look, folks, the real talk answer is if Putin wins in Ukraine, he does not stop. He's got to gamble all the way. It'll be Poland or the Baltics, and watch what happens. You want the world to collapse into war? That's how you get war. So,
well, Estonia gave them all their tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, It's like these are people that understand. I mean, they lived under the Soviets. They know what the threat is.
Yeah, they know what will happen to them.
Yeah. So, Rick, look, I mean, you worked in DOD. You know a lot about this stuff. Yeah. I just got to ask you, how do you see the next stage of the war playing out?
Well, look, I mean, the Russians now are going to try to do what Russians traditionally did and win with mass. The initial attack on Ukraine about a year ago was an air mobile operation. They used paratroopers and they used armored columns, motor rifle divisions to come in and try to encircle Kyiv. It did not work. They got their asses handed to them. They have really now stepped back to the World War I, World War II model, where they're massing 500,000 minimally trained troops on the border, and they're shoving 50-year-old but still perfectly workable AK rifles in their hands and saying, that way. Ukraine is going to have a very tough fight on its hands. It is going to be a very bloody fight on a very difficult slog in the coming weeks and months. We need to make sure that they can dominate the airspace above, because the human wave attack is worthless if they're dominating the airspace above. And we need to make sure we continue to provide them with up to the minute intelligence and all the capability they need to wage this war. We have been able to help them behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, but it is going to take more between now and then, and it's going to take leveraging mobility, intelligence, air power, air defense systems, and frankly, we're going to end up pulling a logistical chain to them that keeps them supplied at the front lines. They need artillery ammunition. They need fuel. They need all the things that an army burns at a ridiculous rate all the time. And unfortunately for this situation, the Russian supply lines are short. Our supply lines to help Ukraine are long. So it's going to be a very tough push going forward. And this human wave attack stuff is going to be, it's going to make for some very tough going. The Ukrainians are qualitatively better, but the Russians are going to throw a whole lot of bodies at them.
So let me ask a specific question. What do you think they're sending a lot of Bradley fighting vehicles over there?
Yep.
Right. And they're going to get there, as I understand it, before the most of the M1 Abrams and before the Leopards, before they're trained up to fighting the Leopards. What will be the impact of those, do you think?
So the Brad's an AFV. It's great for supporting troops. It's not an it is an armored vehicle, but it's not an anti-tank vehicle. I mean, some have tows, but it's not going to be. You don't put a Bradley against a tank. That's a bad outcome for the Brad. But they are good in terms of mobility. They are good in terms of supporting infantry troops on the ground. And then some of them do have anti-tank weapons mounted on them, but mostly it's going to be that big fat cannon on the top. That chain gun is going to be causing all kinds of trouble. And the Russians are very keen on they have an equivalent when it's slightly older called the BMP. They've done a lot of BMPs.
I've seen a lot of those burning on videos.
The mix. What's that?
I've seen a lot of the BMPs burning in videos.
Yeah, the BMPs burn pretty well. The interesting thing is, the Russians have burned through their tank inventory of almost all their modern tanks, T-90s, T-80s, and their updated T-72s. They have burned through thousands of those. Now, they still have thousands of them sitting in a depot somewhere, like in eastern Russia, because the Russians never throw anything away. But this is not this is a war right now where the tank battle is disproportionately working out in the favor of Ukraine so far. But once we get the M1s in there, once we get the Abrams in there, I think you'll be a real change of tone and risk, because it is one of the finest tanks in the world. The targeting on them is they can run and gun. The tank can shoot and move, and hopefully we're getting their crews trained quickly enough on shoot and move that it's going to be enable them to quickly adjust and be definitive on the battlefield. There's a big American tank training facility called Grafenwohr in Germany that I know Ukrainian tank folks are being trained there now, and in Oklahoma as well. So hopefully those guys are going to be ready to jump in the next 30 to 60 days and really make a difference. We are going to get into the spring season where Ukraine turns to mud, and it's going to be a really tough window for armored vehicles in the squish, as they say. So it's going to get look. It is a battle that can and must be won. It will not be easy.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we just look back at any war, but look at World War II. I mean, there are a lot of setbacks, and it's been 100%. Extraordinary to me that there have been as few after the initial push that they're able to do into Kherson, and the Ukrainians haven't lost a lot of battles.
No, they really haven't, and they have adopted a much more NATO-style, American-style mobility battle where they use inexpensive anti-tank weapons against expensive tanks, where they use targeting with drones particularly to go after not just Russian frontline forces, but their logistics train behind them. And they have consistently been able to deploy special operations forces to harass and compromise Russian forces in their rear, which has been a real game changer. But again, there's nothing that substitutes for intelligence and logistics coming from the West and from NATO and the U.S. Those things are going to make a huge difference in terms of um, of how the Ukrainians are able to wage this battle. And look, at this point, I believe that Ukraine is consistently won on the battlefield. Their morale is higher than the Russians. They are now troops that are trained and bloodied. They've been to the rodeo. They've seen the elephant, and they know how to fight. They know how to fight this enemy. And as you know, Russians have never notoriously been quick to change their tune on anything, and they don't reward a lot of initiative in their troops. So,
yeah.
Well, guys, you know what? I think we ought to probably wrap it up for tonight. We were not able to get Malcolm. We had some technical issues here, and of course, Sarah is on the front lines tonight. So I hope you folks will keep her and all the other Ukrainian and European and American folks who are standing the line tonight against Russia, against this invasion, against these war crimes. I hope you'll keep them all in your prayers, and I hope that you will help groups like Liberty Ukraine, and I hope that you will continue to remember that this fight may be 7,000 miles away, but it really does matter on where this world ends up in a few short months, when either Russia is defeated and goes home and Putin's government collapses, or he becomes a threat that consumes the civilized Western world.
And what we can do here is we can support those who support Ukraine.
Yes.
And unfortunately, for those of us who had a soft spot for the Republican Party at one time, Joe Biden needs to be reelected. He has been the best friend for Ukraine. He has helped hold together and put together this international coalition. And it's clear that he is a central figure in galvanizing support for Ukraine.
100%.
I mean, you can say he's old, but I tell you what, man, you get up at 4:15 in the morning after 4 hours sleep, you fly to Ukraine, fly to Poland, then get on a 10-hour plane. The guy has proven at every moment to meet the moment. And it's just unimaginable what the world would be like if Donald Trump were president today.
He really has. And my by the way, my friend who's a civil engineer is he said, I'm watching you. My VPN is slow, but watching you and Stu, thanks so much.
Well, thank him.
Guys, thank you so much. Have a great evening. We'll see you again next week on the strategy session. And stay tuned. We'll be bringing you more shows like this that are a little pop-up, little specials. And we appreciate every one of you. Hope you'll go to resolutesquare.com, sign up for the newsletters. It's free. And if you choose to support us, we're very grateful. It's a growing organization. We've got amazing writers coming on stream. And in fact, I owe Lisa, our editor, an article. So I'm going to go and write it. Have a great night, everybody.
And before we go, let me say, if you're not subscribed to the Enemies List, Rick Wilson's podcast,
thank you.
Your Life is Incomplete. You should correct that immediately and go and subscribe. Rick started this thing not very long ago, and it's just exploded. And it's becoming one of the most popular podcasts in America for a good reason. So don't be left out.
Thanks.
Sign up.
Well, yeah, the Enemies List, where all fine podcasts are sold. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks, Stu.